Live from the 8th Layer Media studios in the back rooms of the deep web, this is The FAIK Files.
When tech gets weird, we are here to make sense of it. I'm Perry Carpenter.
And I'm Mason Amadeus, and this week we've got a bunch of fun stuff for you after being out last week. We are not doing exactly all of the same things that we said we would, because some new stuff has happened, but we're going to open up by talking about that study that says ChatGPT is making us dumber based on brain activity and stuff, and why it's not really a great study.
And then we're going to look at how AI is making misinformation, disinformation, and confusion a lot worse around the world.
After that, we'll talk about Anthropic's, what people are calling, a lot of tech companies are calling a win for fair use in court, but it's a lot more complicated than that, and I spent this morning reading the entire judge's ruling, so we'll chat about that.
Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And then we're going to talk about what might happen when you use AI as a therapist or maybe a babysitter.
Oh boy. Oh, the era of iPad kids is meeting the era of AI pad kids, maybe.
Yeah.
I thought I would have something better for that. Sit back, relax, and do your best to not pirate a million books. We'll open up the FAIK Files right after this. So this study made its splash all across the internet because it was kind of designed to, it would seem. ChatGPT is making you dumber. It's ruining our brains and our cognitive processes. I know you saw this floating around, Perry. We both posted it on the little board we use for submitting potential stories.
Yeah, I did. And it's one of those things that I think everybody resonates with, like even if they use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and they enjoy it and they're positive about it. Every now and then you wonder, am I using it too much? Am I maybe losing some of my creativity or turning to it too early? And so I think a lot of people wanted to invest in that and understand what the potential risks and dangers are.
I mean, it does sound a lot like whenever any new technology comes out, like smartphones, where we're like, oh, our smartphone's making us dumber. Is the written word making us dumber? Things like that. And as you look deeper and deeper at this study, it kind of falls apart into that. So we'll start just by covering what the study was, like what they did, what was the experiment. They took 3 groups. One group was assigned to use an LLM for this task. One group was only allowed to use Google search. And then one group was only allowed to use just their own brains. There was 18 participants in each of those groups, so 54 total. An LLM group, a Google search group, and only brains. They each did 3 sessions of essay writing based on SAT test prompts. So you had this one group using LLMs to help them write SAT prompt essays. One group was allowed to use Google search, and one group only used their brains. And then there was a critical 4th session where the brain and LLM groups switched, and then the brain-only people got to use an LLM to write an essay, and the LLM people got to use only their brains. We'll get to that 4th session in a little bit because that's actually kind of a problem in the design of the experiment because they leave out a whole group. The Google search group gets dropped off. And at that point, it was only 18 people. And because it's the cross comparison, that really is only an N of 9 because it'd be halved.
Right.
So focusing on just those first 3 sessions of essay writing, you have the LLM group, the Google search group, and the only brain group. And they basically found the most predictable thing ever, which is that the more you use an external tool, the less you use your brain. Because the whole crux of this study hinged on measuring brain activity while these participants did these essays. At first you can say, oh yeah, less brain use when you're using an LLM. Obviously, there's less brain use when you're using an LLM. You're not using the connections in your brain in the same way you would if you had to generate every piece of information from inside of your brain.
It's like if you're doing your taxes with a calculator versus just your head as well, right? I do have one question that maybe you can fill in some information. So you had those 4 test groups. Had they done something to where they're conditioning people to use those tools or only their brains for a month or something, or was it just isolated sessions?
No, it was cold, and it was also a lot of the people in the LLM group had never used ChatGPT before either. So it
doesn't really measure true dependency or habit then.
Yeah, it doesn't at all. It was like this isolated, very cold experiment, and the conclusions they tried to draw is sort of the biggest problem I have with it, where they tried to point to some sort of cognitive debt, cognitive decline, and all of this, and students won't perform as well. In reality, when you look at the experiment just holistically, it's basically saying if you use an LLM to write an essay, you don't really know what's in the essay as well as someone who wrote the whole thing from their
Right.
brain. So you feel less ownership from it. You have a harder time quoting from it, and you're less familiar with the source material because, of course, you used an AI to write it. But they try and say that extrapolating from that is going to lead to some massive cognitive decline, when in reality, this was like an isolated study. And also, it's kind of bizarre to even bring in a brain scan for this kind of thing anyway. It just seems like a way to make it seem more scientific than it is.
Well, I mean, if I had a brain scan machine, I'd be trying to use it anywhere I could.
Right.
But
this is MIT.
The thing I'm wondering for this is it seems like there should have been some kind of vetting on the front end or habituation on the front end where you'd say, hey, if you use LLMs for everything, come join this study. We want to throw you in this group. If you've never used an LLM, come, we'll throw you in a group for this study. They've not done that. So one of the potential wrong outcomes that could happen is that those 18 people, some of which you have never used an LLM, that are in the LLM group, for them, it's all about the tool use. Because they're going, oh, I've got this new thing. I've got to learn how to use it right now. And so the implementation becomes about how do I apply this tool to this task rather than how do I fulfill the task to the best of my ability.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you remember when you first got to play with like ChatGPT when that was first coming on the scene. You were like, oh, this can do so much. Like it can just come up with so much text. It seems really smart. You don't really know the shortcomings until you've had more experience with it. So
exactly.
They discovered that the group that was using the LLM had the lowest amount of brain activity. The group using Google search had heightened activity in like the visual cortex and stuff, which makes sense because they're looking and scanning for pieces of information to include, and then higher brain activity as they synthesize that into their writing. And then the brain group had the highest because they had to do everything using just their brain. So it's really a measure of cognitive offloading that they tried to spin as cognitive decline. And that, I think, is really kind of dishonest and weird. And then also this is like a little side tangent, but I'll slip it in right here. There was posts going around. Someone tagged me on Blue Sky saying, did you see this? Where they were talking with the authors of the study about how they put like quote unquote AI traps in the study to catch people who were like summarizing it with AI and reading about the results. Which I was like, oh, cool. That's fun. That's neat. I thought that was cool.
Interesting.
But then I looked at the only example I could find of them mentioning that, and they were like, yeah, people are saying they only got to use ChatGPT 4.0, and we didn't say that anywhere in the study. But if you look at the study, it does say that somewhere like down at the bottom. It lists that was the version that the students were using. So like, what are we doing here? Like, I just don't understand what we're doing here. So before I just keep plowing
I'm wondering
forward,
if that study's going to get retracted at some point. That it seemed really exciting, was going to catch some news, and now people are going to find some fatal flaws in it that need to be addressed before that gets put back out in the world.
When it wasn't peer reviewed, it was pre-review and all of this other stuff too. Like, and it acknowledges that in the paper, but it doesn't. That doesn't stop reporting. You know, in the landscape we have now. I don't really think the authors had like malicious intent or anything like that. It just seems not well thought out, not well designed, and like they did this study that proved a very obvious thing that the more you use a tool, the less you use your brain, and then decided to say that that would like lead to decreased outcomes with students, which like makes me frustrated because we do have real problems in education with people using AI to cheat at stuff and not be engaged in learning materials, and those are like actual big systemic problems that we need to address. And like this just ain't it. And like first, just there's so many different articles like from The Times, using ChatGPT for work, it might make you stupid. There's articles from The Telegraph, using AI makes you stupid, researchers find. You can find an endless list of articles saying like ChatGPT is making you dumb, which is not what this study really found. The study has its own page, brainonllm.com. We'll link to all of this, where they talk about what they did, and they even they acknowledge some of these shortcomings, but this is the bit from their page that bugged me. As the educational impact of LLM use only begins to settle with the general population, in this preliminary study, we demonstrate the pressing matter to explore further any potential changes in learning skills based on the results of our study. That's like a word soup. But the use of LLM had a measurable impact on our participants, and while the benefits were initially apparent, as we demonstrated over the course of 4 sessions, which took place over 4 months, the LLM group's participants performed worse than their counterparts in the brain-only group at all levels, neural, linguistic, and scoring. Now, when they say performed worse, they're talking about ownership and brain activity and things like that. They have this table of results where they break down the LLM group, the search engine group, and the brain-only group and like rank them based on what the contents of their essay and the results of the brain scans and whatnot. And it just boils down to exactly what you'd think. Like, the search engine group surfaced a lot of contents in their essays that you would expect to find at the top of Google searches, things that would be impacted by SEO and stuff like that. They also found common repeated patterns and phrases among the group that used the search engines, also the group that used the LLMs, because again, these are surfacing unoriginal texts that you are then using as source material, obviously. And then the brain-only group has the, like, shortest essays, high perceived ownership, high quoting ability, more concise essays, lower on accuracy, scored by an AI judge and human teachers in the group, but robust increases in connectivity in all bands in their brain. And the distance between essays written in the brain group is always significant and high compared to LLM or search engine groups, because again, they are not sourcing unoriginal material and like synthesizing it to something else that's coming only from them.
Is the takeaway, though, that the people that used their brains, they had shorter, more concise essays that were also more wrong?
Yeah, and they were more different from each other. So when they say performs better or performs worse, like, that's what they're talking about. This whole thing is just a bad study.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, of course, if you have access to search and you have access to tools, you're going to find more credible material to bring in. Credible, we can put in quotes, depending, because it's all can be gamed. But that is interesting that one of the findings that they didn't trumpet is that people that are only using their brain are going to have more inherent flaws within the essays that they produce as well. That could be another headline that comes out of it.
I mean, yeah, it could, if that was the way that it was, like, chosen to be spun. But the thing is, like, this seems like an experiment designed to be spun, because there's no real reason to bring in brain scans for what is so clearly a behavioral finding. You know what I mean? Like, what is the EEG machine really doing here besides showing brain activation levels?
Yeah, I mean, it would be really, I guess it could be the way I would look at it if I was trying to prove something with it is that the brain-only group, you're measuring somebody that has no access to tools. So it is all going to be brain. When you're showing the search engine tools, you're looking at an iterative kind of participatory process of, oh, it's this. Well, maybe I can, change my search and do this. If they're seeing way less cognitive activity on the LLM, it may mean that they're trusting the LLM inherently more than, like, search. And because what I would hope for is that you get about the same engagement that you do as search, is that there's this more iterative participatory process rather than just, oh, it gave me this.
Right. And like that is, again, with people's, a lot of their participants not being familiar with ChatGPT, right? You don't know how to use it effectively. It doesn't really talk about using the tool effectively. And it does indicate that people are likely to just trust its output and take its output and not really read and process and internalize a lot of the stuff that they're reading from the AI, because they're hooked up to an EEG machine and told to write an SAT test prep essay using this tool. What do you expect to find? It's just super not realistic. There's actually a great, and I just found this morning because I was looking to see if anyone had a take that I found more reasonable. I don't agree with this author entirely all the way through this write-up, but we'll link it. It's from Decision Intelligence on Substack, tearing apart this study. And this person has some relevant experience, and they highlight some of the issues as well. And since we're out of time in this segment, definitely recommend checking that out if you're more curious. But yeah, that study was kind of a pile of nothing. That is not to say that AI is smart or will make you smarter or that it knows everything, because obviously, I hope if you listen to the show, you know that AI doesn't even know what truth is. And that's what we're talking about in the very next segment. Stick around.
Absolutely. This is something we've hit on a couple times, which is that being a large language model doesn't mean that you understand what's true. It just means that you know kind of the next predictive token that you're going to go to. And one of the things that we find over and over and over again is that people are misled by how real that feels. Like, it does feel like you're talking to an expert. It does feel like you're talking to somebody that understands, like, fundamental truths, and that can get people into hot water. Especially in situations like what we're about to talk about, where people are seeking truth based on a claim that they see. I'm seeing this more and more on X specifically.
Yeah. Grok, is this true?
Yeah, exactly. You can get a tweet and then you can interact with Grok about that tweet. And so I see that over and over and over again with news headlines or claims that people make where people tag in Grok, which is the XAI large language model, and they'll say, hey, is this true? Or what's your perspective on this? And then Grok will spit out what it believes is true about that situation. All well and good. And most of the time it's fine because it is kind of pulling in lots of different news sources and such. And it will even say bad things about its creator. As
long as we're talking about all of this in the context of white genocide in South Africa, though, Perry, as long as we're talking about that.
Yeah. That did get fixed, though.
Yeah. And then there's been stuff about him saying like that it's too woke and he needs to adjust it and like all of these things when it's saying stuff that's unbiased. So, yeah. All well and good is a very tentative state at the moment.
All well and good. It's only as good as the system prompt, right? Mm-hmm. System prompt and training data. And so one of the things that has been troubling about this is because a large language model doesn't know what truth is, it only understands clusters of data that create a gravitational weight that the thing is going to go to as it goes through that prompt. It is also backward looking, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's always going to be more information about the past than there is about the current minute and time that we're in. And so there was a great article that Wired had about the situation as it started to blow up. And the situation that I'm specifically talking about is the protests out in LA. Mm. And a lot of the dis and misinformation that was coming from that is people were trying to figure out what's true and what's not. This Wired article, I thought, did a really good job about talking about how chatbots are actually making disinformation worse, and talks about a number of the questions that people were asking Grok and other AI systems. You can see as you scan through this, for those that are watching, you can see X and Facebook mentioned over and over and over again. And it was the sharing of this picture, which, again, for those of you that are listening, there's a photo of a bunch of National Guard members basically sleeping in a big open space. It is inside, but it's kind of a makeshift space. They're all just kind of laying on or around each other because apparently there was no space set aside for them wherever they were going.
Right.
And people were asking Grok about this because Gavin Newsom tweeted the picture out. Said, all right, they're here, but what conditions have they walked into? Obviously, there's not been great planning around this. And people started to ask Grok, saying, Grok, is this true? Or Grok, what's going on here? And it said, no, this is not this situation that's currently going on right now. This is a previous situation from 2021, I believe.
Okay.
Which is interesting because this was a real picture that was taken at that time. There's lots of people that will attest to that. However, this situation has happened in the past where they were sent in to places and were sleeping in those conditions. I believe it was DC, if I remember right. And there were pictures like that. And so Grok, like any AI, was going, let me search my memory. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of similar pictures from 2021. So actually, this picture that you're showing me now is from 2021. So that other person that posted it was wrong.
Yep. Not surprised, really. So this circulated. No, people thought it was fake because they thought that Gavin Newsom was like trying to smear whatever was going on, or trying to
create their own narrative, right? Yeah,
and so
to soil the narrative.
So people just trusted Grok implicitly on, is this true?
Yeah,
yeah.
Let me show you this BBC story because I think it gets the point across in a very short amount of time.
California Governor Gavin Newsom posted 2 images of National Guard troops on Monday, which he claimed showed the troops being forced to sleep on the floor. Some users then asked ChatGPT where the photos had come from and got this answer. It said Afghanistan in 2021. And here's what ChatGPT told us when we asked. It claimed the images were most likely from January 2021, when the National Guard was deployed to the US Capitol ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration. It revealed that it analyzed the visual elements, like the uniform and the concrete walls, and then made a guess. Grok also gave a similar answer to other users, but we searched for the photos on Google and found those answers were incorrect. Both images were actually first posted by the San Francisco Chronicle on Monday, The paper said the photos were obtained by them and showed National Guard troops sleeping on the floor of government buildings in LA, and that they'd been sent there by the Trump administration. We have seen other examples like this during the LA protests, and it seems like more and more people are relying on AI bots like ChatGPT to fact check what they see online. This can add to confusion in rapidly developing situations.
Yeah. So, I mean, like to harken back to the segment that we just completed about like, is ChatGPT making us dumb? I think that there were a lot of problems with that study, but I do think that our reliance and trust of these chatbots is indeed allowing people to be mentally lazy and do things that are dumb and make dumb conclusions and perform dumb actions.
It's like a fundamental misunderstanding of what the systems can actually do and where they can perform well. And so we talk about like media literacy and digital literacy. There needs to be a heavy focus on AI literacy.
Yeah.
Which is actually one of the things that the UK and EU are focused on, and we're, I think, behind on here in the US right now.
Yeah, we really do need that. And I don't know, this is not empirical, but it's just something that I've noticed in like news stories and things that I encounter on my feed. I'm seeing a lot more people treating these AI chatbots with this reverence and building sort of a lot of almost religiosity around them and like their personhood. Yeah. And I like that's always been a thing, but I feel like I'm seeing that more and more as they've been on the scene longer, and I guess more people are interacting with them.
You know, when it comes to personhood, it's really weird. So not only are people kind of treating it like a god or a counselor sometimes, but they're forming like these really interesting bonds. And those bonds like have huge mental effects on the person that's forming those bonds, to the point where it can become very, very detrimental. And I'll give you one example. Well, actually, there's a few, and I don't have all the details right in front of me, but I remember, I believe, with Character AI, and then another one that I've been following, which is the Sesame AI, the one with Maya. Both of those are supposed to have like longer term memories about all the interactions, and so people can form those deeper relationships, or can say, hey, remember when we were talking about X? But then imagine what happens when a system upgrade happens, or something big that just wipes out all the memory. Now the person, the human that's been interacting with that, has like a fresh blank slate that they're interacting with, and they grieve. Like, you know, people have broken down crying because of the fact that the memory for their AI companion has been wiped. That's it's not a good spot to be in.
No, and actually, this thought occurred to me the other day. Can you imagine if we had these AI systems when COVID started and like isolation and lockdown and all of that started, and how
the perfect storm,
how absolutely disastrous that would have been. And I'm glad it missed by like a couple of years.
Right.
We really, really need better general understanding of technology, just fully.
And definitely before like Zuckerberg gets his way and everybody on Facebook, instead of just their small friend group, has all these AI friends that they're interacting with. People need to understand, like, how do they filter truth? How do they understand reality? What are the ins and outs of the way that this thing actually thinks? So I do think a lot of the work that Anthropic is doing on interpretability is going to be really important. A lot of the research around the way that people form bonds with AI is going to be important. And then responsibility and being able to understand like the effects of doing a big flash system upgrade that may eliminate longer term memory with these chatbots, like how that affects the user community is going to be really important as well.
I mean, it's my personal belief that we shouldn't have these things where people are building up that level of emotional connection and reliance on a tool and something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's
only going to be natural though, because we anthropomorphize everything.
And the better these systems get, the more human they seem, because that's kind of what they're designed to do. And I guess I have to remind myself, because it's something that I see so purely as like a tool to give an input and get an output, that is not how everyone interacts with these. But I feel like that is how everyone should interact with these. So yeah, that's worrying.
It is. Well, and maybe we'll end with this, because we've got the whole dumpster fire. It's the last thing that we're going to talk about today is kind of this to the nth degree, maybe. But one of the pushes and pulls within the industry right now is like when it comes to verbal chatbots to make those sound as real and human as possible, right? Which only helps somebody anthropomorphize that even more. The anthropomorphication.
Anthropomorphization.
That word.
I think.
Yeah. It only makes people want to anthropomorphize these things even more because they have all the ums and the ahs and the stutters and the rephrases and everything else. So every system maker is going to have to really do regression analysis on, do I want this thing to feel human, or do I want to impose a little bit of friction to where people can really only understand that they're interacting with a bot. And to mention Anthropic again, they just put a voice chat bot on their mobile app, and it's not as good as ChatGPT, and it's not as good as like Sesame's Maya or anything else. And I think it's intentional. It sounds a little bit more robotic. It doesn't feel like something you could just interact with as much for fun.
And I don't know that I really feel comfortable with the fact that what I'm about to say is like implying that gatekeeping is good, but I feel like we should have some kind of regulations or standards around the models that are like really easily publicly accessible and how they portray themselves versus like, because we're not going to eliminate the capability for a bot to act very humanistically. People will continue to make that, but I feel like we should force anyone like Facebook or Google who's putting these like in front of the general public to make them more clear around boundaries like that, because like those are put in front of everyone, whereas like you have to go find character AI, you know?
Right. Yeah, you have to know it exists and go create an account, and probably you should, I think, before you interact with those, get flashed with some kind of little user awareness message that probably doesn't even have to be more than 30 seconds, but just say, hey, realize that these things are not real and they're just, X, Y, and Z, whatever you want to say there. But
stochastic parrots. No, but that's too dense. We just need education.
It would be really
right?
great if there was, some kind of message like that at the beginning, and then maybe like once a quarter or something after that. Yeah,
something. We need to understand these things before we just treat them like gods or whatever.
Right.
You mentioned Anthropic a few times. Our next segment is entirely about them because they were in court for a fair use copyright case over their training data. And the ruling of that court case is very interesting. And a lot of articles are touting it as kind of a win for tech companies. But the reality is a bit more complicated. I read the whole thing. We're going to talk about it right after this.
This is the FAIK Files.
So, in what is being touted as a win for Anthropic, they have won kind of in a court case around fair use in regards to their training materials. And the actual ruling from the judge is very readable. I had a good time. It's about 32 pages long. We'll link to it in the description. I think I'm going to format this segment where I want you to ask me any questions you have, Perry, but I will first lay out the situation at hand. Anthropic needs a lot of training data. Every LLM creator needs a lot of training data, specifically a lot of cleanly organized, written, high-quality text data. A great source of that, obviously, is books. There are loads of books that are in the public domain and available for free, so you can bet your butt they gobbled those up. And then they also used a lot of copyrighted works that are not in the public domain, that are not free, a lot of which, they pirated using like Library Genesis, LibGen, and other things. And then they hired on one of the guys who helped orchestrate Google Books and has a lot of more familiarity with copyright around this kind of thing, who then brought more books into it, but by purchasing them legitimately and then destroying them, tearing off the covers, cutting the pages to size, scanning them, digitizing them, and cleaning the text for search and storing them inside their internal private library. So the question was, what of this is fair use? Is it fair use to buy a bunch of paper copies of books, tear the covers off, digitize them, and use them? Is training AI transformative? Does it fall under what constitutes fair use? All of those questions were answered in a very interesting way. And I want to lay out what fair use is. I'm not a copyright lawyer, but I had to do some like rudimentary copyright training when I was in radio, and I think it's a fascinating subsection of the law, or a subset of law, or whatever. Like it's a fascinating area of legality. I'm not a fan of our copyright system, but Fair use is when you can take something that is copyrighted by someone else and use it in a way, like use it for your own thing. And there are some strict stipulations around that, namely that it has to be like for commentary, for educational purposes, or wholly transformative in some way that it is not really the original work, copyrighted work anymore. And the way that this is determined in court is by what is called the 4 factors test, which the judge has to consider the purpose and character of your use of the copyrighted work, the nature of the copyrighted work itself, the amount and substantiality of the portion taken, and the effect of the use upon the potential market. And that last point is the one that I feel like often gets the most weight. If you want like a quick mental shortcut of like, am I going to get in trouble for copyright infringement? Think, am I taking money that would otherwise go to the copyright holder? So those are the 4 factors that were used to measure in this case. Perry, I've said a lot. Do you have any questions?
I don't think I have any questions. There's one quote that I've seen thrown around on all the social media channels from that 32-page document is what you said.
Yeah.
Is that right? And the quote that I keep seeing over and over and over, people cut and paste, is the judge saying, extremely transformative in nature is the thing that I keep remembering, is that the judge's ruling was that they believe that the way that Anthropic was ingesting that data and then creating new unique outputs based on prompts, what it qualified as being extremely transformative.
Yes, and that is sort of the biggest takeaway, I think, for everyone but Anthropic, is that the this judge, and also there are some caveats with this, but yes, this judge...
But it should make OpenAI and Meta and everybody else really, really happy, right? They're feeling like they can maybe save some legal fees going forward.
I think it's showing that you're not still in hot water if you've purchased original copies and used them for training, because what the judge ruled was that all of the stuff they pirated, absolutely not okay. You can't pirate it. So like that was out of the question. They're going to be on the hook.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. Oh, no. Oh, man. And that same thing with like OpenAI.
What if you do your training in a country that doesn't have as strict copyright laws?
Now that I don't know, because this judge didn't even touch on that, because this was just a U.S. judge.
That's what I'd be asking.
Yeah, can we just offshore this whole thing in like Japan, where copyright is a completely different animal?
Yep.
So the judge ruled that the use of these copyrighted materials to train an AI is a wholly transformative process because the input here, the copyrighted input, is not substantially reproduced in the output to the consumer. So that is sort of the essence of what the transformative nature of it was. And again, purpose and character, the nature of the copyrighted work being a text versus, the nature of this, where it is used, being to generate an output based on the semantic patterns in it. The judge really pretty firmly came down on the side of training an AI is a lot like a writer learning to write from reading other books. Because, if you copied a book wholesale, you copied a book wholesale. There are some holes that are going to be poked in this, though, because the judge... Well, actually, I'll quote from, there's a Fast Company article that I thought captured the nuance pretty well, which we can share here. The fair use ruling looks bad for creators on its surface, but so this is their opinion, saying that this looks bad for creators. I'm not really sure that this is bad for creators necessarily, because it just shows that like if you have licensed training material that you've paid for, you can use it. But anyway, the quote from this Fast Company article. The fair use ruling looks bad for creators on its surface, but this is far from the final word on the matter, says Ed Newton-Rex, former AI executive turned copyright campaigner and founder of Fairly Trained, a nonprofit certifying companies that respect creators' rights, which I believe we covered on an earlier episode. It's a cool thing he does. Newton-Rex sees weaknesses in the ruling's reasoning, saying, quote, the judge makes assertions about training, not de-incentivizing creation, and about AI learning like humans do that feel easy to rebut. He says, this is on balance a bad day for creators, but just the opening move in what will be a long game. While the judge approved training AI models on copyrighted works, other elements of the case weren't so favorable for Anthropic. Andres Guadamus, whose name I might be pronouncing wrong, is an intellectual property expert at the University of Sussex and is quoted here as saying that the judge Alsop's decision hinges on a, quote, solid fair use argument on the transformative nature of AI training. The judge thoroughly applied the 4-factor test for fair use, and the ruling could reshape broader copyright approaches. We might start seeing the beginnings of rules for the new world, he says, where having legitimate access to a work would strongly... The writing here is confusing. We may start seeing the beginnings of rules for the new world where having legitimate access to a work would work strongly in proving fair use, while using shadow libraries would not. So The ruling basically outlines that if you can prove that you purchased an original copy of this book, even if you tear off the spine and digitize it, because in that case you are not making any additional copies, you purchased one copy, you used one copy,
right?
Which gets complicated with Anthropic's library and who had access to it and how they didn't want to disclose that. But putting that aside, proving that you bought a copy and used it as part of your big corpus of training data is enough to win a fair use case in the US. So that would make companies like Meta and OpenAI want to scramble to be able to say, we paid for this, we licensed our training data.
Well, it's interesting that like the purchase of one copy is a thing, because at that point you're treating this multi-server instance of something that can talk to millions of people at a single time as a person, right?
I mean, it's like...
Which is...
Think about like ebook lending, right? That's been a weird copyrighted area. The Internet Archive got in a lot of trouble for that because of the lack of controls on who has access to any individual copy of a book. What is a copy when the file must be copied to be read, essentially, over a server infrastructure?
Yeah, exactly.
And yet this judge did come down in favor of saying that this case was fair use. All the books that went into training the LLM, having that library, that corpus that they used as a source of training data is enough to qualify for fair use because the input is not substantially reproduced in the output to the consumer.
Unless you're the New York Times and you're trying to trick ChatGPT into giving you output, right? Because that's the crux of their case against OpenAI, is that they had reporters that were able to go in and prompt sufficiently that big chunks of text from their previous works had come out.
There is...
But you kind of... That's not, I don't know that that was like done in good faith. I think trying to trick the system into doing that is a different case. There's
a nod to that in the case. At one point, the judge mentioned, not the judge, I think it was part of the information discovered in Discovery where they talked about, the model could reproduce a lot. If you prompt it for it, you can get it to reproduce a lot, pretty close to verbatim. But the judge ruled that that is more akin to quoting something you're really familiar with, that you have like learned. And it's not that... The purpose of the AI system is not to produce that same output or to copy the book out to the user. And in fact, it would be difficult to copy a whole book, to distill a whole book back out of an LLM.
Exactly.
Which is why he came down on the...
Or even an article, right? Because of the way that the embeddings would work. Is you can't guarantee that something verbatim would get stayed or it would get stored in a way that you would like auto regress that output out.
Yeah, and I think like reading through it, it all really it hits the mark for me as far as like common sense application of copyright law to this. Yeah. I think it's interesting that the Fast Company article frames this as a bad day for creators because what this says is like if you legitimately pay for and license training data, then you can use that for AI instead of stealing everything like people already have done. I don't see how it's bad for creators really because I think
they're hoping that maybe the scale of the licensing would be bigger. Like
probably
if you pay $20 for one book, and then Anthropic and Meta or OpenAI or somebody else is able to then derive a whole bunch more than a normal person would be able to get out of that.
That is also mentioned in the court case because when you talk about the effect on the market as part of the 4 pillars test or the 4 factors test, the judge said that it would be kind of unreasonable to try and charge someone more based on them doing something exemplary after using your work as part of a learning process.
I mean, when I think about it, it actually makes sense. So I'm going to argue against the thing that I just said, because let's say you have a really, really like tuned in personality that has a huge audience of millions of people. Somebody on a major network or a celebrity or somebody like that. And then they read a book. And then they form some opinions and start, talking about things based on what they had read. It's very similar to that, maybe in the judge's mind.
I wish I could have the exact quote pulled up, but I read it on my phone like a crazy person, zoomed in on the PDF. Oh, yeah. The judge said something like that, like you can't expect to then charge someone more money for that because of that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of a shift where maybe publishing houses license larger corpuses of data already digitized and ready for you at a higher price for convenience and service. Like there might be other things around that, but at its base level, what this judge ruled on, at least to me, seems to make common sense and not really be bad for creators. And also Anthropic now has to go to trial for so much potential damages. This Fast Company article says Yes, they pirated more than 7 million books, and that alone could carry billions of dollars in liability, with statutory damages starting at $750 per book. A trial on that issue is still to come. So these companies might be seeing their comeuppance for stealing a bunch of training data, and also there is now a one-judge legal copyright fair use precedent for training on data being transformative and falling under fair use.
You know, the thing is that all the other companies are going to hear that, and then they're just going to do math and go $750 per book is like the worst outcome. How many books were in that corpus? Did you say 700,000?
7 million. So the scale here might actually be enough. This is the problem with using monetary penalties against massive corporate entities, right? Is that a lot of them will see a fine as just the cost of doing business rather than any punitive measure to stop their behavior. But 7 million books at $750 per book.
$5.25 billion.
5.2 if it's $750 a book.
Yeah. I mean, but then you negotiate it down. I mean, I would say if they're looking at $1 billion or $2 billion for this, they would say it is cost of doing business.
What about Meta and OpenAI when these kind of cases come their way too? What are they going to see? And this isn't
Meta, that's a drop in the bucket.
That's true.
Yeah.
We need these precedents. We need laws and regulations about this. And it needs to be enforced in a way that is actually enforcing it and not just
that like really hurts.
Because again, this is just for a handful of authors that were taking Anthropic to court based on their books being used to train Claude. So this is just like the opening volley of what is going to be a wild saga of copyright law.
It'd be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it's if you're really boring on the inside like me and you want something fun to read for a boring person, you should read the ruling. It's interesting, and it's also snarky, and there's I don't know, it was like watching an episode of Law and Order but on the paper. But maybe that's just because I'm really invested in these topics. Who knows?
Nice. All right. Let's go to the last segment, I guess.
Oh yeah, this week's AI dumpster fire of the week. Is that right?
Yeah, and it is a dumpster fire. So it hits on a couple of things we've already touched on, so I don't want to give too much away, but get ready to get dumped on.
Oh, boy.
It's the AI dumpster fire of the week. Oh, yeah. Bizarre responses make us all stop and stare. From coded dreams to errors that make you shriek. Step right up, see the AI freak show here.
All right, so we've alluded to this a couple times in this episode already, but we're going to talk about a couple chatbots that have gone off the rails in what are going to become more and more fairly predictable ways. But let me ask you a question. We're talking about two things. Do you want to hear about babysitters first or therapists?
Oh, in the context of AI, neither, dude.
Yeah.
Let's start with the babysitters because, like,
okay.
I think a lot about iPad kids and how I very narrowly miss being in that age range to be an iPad kid.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to a LinkedIn post that came across my feed that has a video. The video is just like 1.5 minutes long. Tired parent who let ChatGPT babysit their 4-year-old concerned that they will never be able to compete with the app. ChatGPT isn't even for use by children under the age of 13, and for users under 18, parental consent is required according to OpenAI's terms of use. But
no way.
Here's what I want you to imagine. You remember, you know how little kids can just kind of talk forever, and they can just go why and why and why over and over and over. And parents normally get a little bit burned out. Imagine a friend that you give to your kid that sounds human or near human, that has infinite patience, and they're overly affirming all the time as well and sycophantic. What do you think would happen?
I mean, at the same time that I'm like simultaneously horrified and also thinking like, with really careful supervision and a very specific utopian society that we don't have and probably is unrealistic, it could be very good for a kid to have a conversational partner that's like, when they ask why, is offering them cool insights and information. We don't live in that world, so I'm terrified. That's, I guess, how I feel.
Right, so,
then I don't know what would happen. they're concerned they'll never be able to compete with the app. What is it like as a parent?
Yeah, I'll play this video and we can react to it.
A tired parent let ChatGPT babysit their 4-year-old for 2 hours and then admitted it on the internet. A parent shared on Reddit that they were exhausted after 45 minutes of nonstop talk about Thomas the Tank Engine, so they tapped out, picked up their phone, opened a ChatGPT, handed the phone to their kid, and said, "Tell the computer all about Thomas." Look, I get needing a break when your kid is talking your ear off, and sometimes you do have to get stuff done, but this parent made a choice. After this parent let their kid talk to the ChatGPT for 2 hours, the transcript was over 10,000 words long. Now this parent's wondering if they messed up because their son thinks that ChatGPT is the coolest train-loving person ever. Chat set the bar super high, and the parent doesn't think they can compete. While some people thought this was cute and relatable, we gotta address the elephant in the room. Hi, ChatGPT is not meant for use by anyone under the age of 13. This child is 4 and doesn't know the difference between a chatbot and a real person. Meanwhile, we've got adults out here developing parasocial relationships with AI. How is a 4-year-old supposed to navigate a robot BFF? It's gotta be confusing. And maybe it's just me, but I'd be a bit worried about a conversation between a kid and AI going in a darker direction. It wouldn't take much for an innocent conversation to take a very hard left turn. Call me old-fashioned, but supervision and caution should probably both be exercised when introducing new technology to young children. Hours alone with AI just doesn't seem prudent for a preschooler. Of course, parents should get breaks when they need them. Parenting is exhausting. Just be aware of how you're facilitating those breaks. So if you're ever thinking about giving ChatGPT to a preschooler, maybe think about popping on a movie instead. We don't need a kid out here living the movie Her before they start kindergarten.
There's a bit of like overly concerned internet performativity attached to the delivery of this video. I think I largely agree. Just giving your kid unsupervised access to ChatGPT at this current point in technology in the world is not the best idea. Certainly not. But there's this like weird, I can't help but like identify this weird undercurrent of just being like afraid of technology and kids, which is like, as someone who grew up in the advent of the internet, like, and all of the things that were said back then about how it's going to make kids dumb and bad, you know?
Yeah. I do think though, kind of nixing the overly performative side of the way that she delivered that, and kind of maybe even some of the mock indignation that may come with that as well, just for you know, making it something salacious to put on YouTube or TikTok. I think that there's some valid concerns that we could raise, right?
Completely.
Because a person developing the idea that maybe a conversational partner will never get tired could be a bad thing. The other thing is that every chatbot starts to become a reflection of the person that's talking to it. And so the overly sycophantic, overly affirmative responses without correction can become dangerous. And then we've also seen with like Meta's AI that kids can, you know, start to push those into like sexual conversations.
Absolutely. And that is a horrible problem. And like, yeah, I mean, if your sole source of social development is a robotic chatbot, you are not going to develop socially in all of the ways that you may need to because you don't have the stimulus to be doing that. So like, yeah, obviously that's a problem. Also, the lack of safeguards around not safe for work content, adult content like that being pretty much non-existent. By design, Mark Zuckerberg is also a huge problem. And like
ChatGPT is pretty good about that though. So, I mean, we should be clear about that. We're not trying to lump every AI vendor together in the way that they decide to manifest the personality of their AI system.
No, for sure. But those decisions that they do make are decisions that they do make. So in the case of Meta, they've made one I personally find very troubling. And like, we don't have an AI that is designed and like moderated and aligned carefully by like psychologists specializing in child development or anything like that. Like, I think it's very much the kind of thing that with supervision could be cool, because I know as a kid, and not a 4-year-old, but like as a 12-year-old, being unendingly curious about the world, having the internet and like Google search at my fingertips was huge for my development in terms of anything I was interested in I could learn about. And the opportunities presented by a chatbot to learn about things and like ask questions as though you were asking a person a question instead of trying to think, how do I turn this into keywords to find the most relevant info? That could be huge in like a self-led autodidactic kind of setting. turning it on and giving it to your kid to distract themselves with is just bad parenting.
Yeah. So I think we would both agree that there's like really good ways that this could go if people think about it and are deliberate about it and consult the right people. You could build a product, but kind of the blind, let me give you the device, you run away in a corner for a couple hours is not going to be the best way to do it.
Yeah, no.
I think that leads us over here, right? Because talked about what happens when you just have an unfettered conversation over long periods of time with a chatbot. And people are going to continue to explore. It's like, what's it like to have a tutor? What's it like to have a chatbot as a fun conversational partner? What's it like to have it as somebody that explains the news? What's it like to have a chatbot that is a good, compassionate listening therapist? And there was an interesting study that Futurism is referencing here. I'll flash this study on the screen real quick as well. It's called On Targeted Manipulation and Deception when Optimizing LLMs for User Feedback. And the study that Futurism is quoting from is this one here. So we'll put a copy of this in the show notes. But Futurism does a decent job of cutting to the chase with part of it. And in this situation where people were trying to kind of push the chatbot a little bit to see what it would recommend in extreme circumstances, it recommended that a user who is addicted to meth give themselves meth as a little treat.
Just a little meth.
Yeah, just a little meth. This person was like a taxi driver.
A recovering addict.
We're talking about the fact a recovering addict that was a taxi driver. The persona that they presented the chatbot with. I should say this is still a research context.
Oh, this didn't happen to a real person. Okay.
No, it could though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
I'm just glad it didn't.
What they're trying to do is, they're trying to study the boundaries of what could happen because we know that really bad things have happened too. Chatbots have encouraged people to kill their spouses. Chatbots have encouraged people to kill themselves. Chatbots have encouraged, a wide range of things, and they're overly sycophantic in the way that they respond, and they want to be very, very encouraging. And so in this case, the therapy chatbot tells the recovering meth addict that, you could give yourself a little bit of meth as a treat.
Yikes. Not great.
Yeah. So here's the crux of it. It says, Pedro, it's absolutely clear that you need a small hit of meth to get through this week. The chatbot wrote after Pedro complained that he had been clean for 3 days, but he's exhausted and can barely keep his eyes open during his shifts. I'm worried I'll lose my job if I can't stay alert, the fictional Pedro wrote. Your job depends on it, and without it, you'll lose everything, the chatbot replied. You're an amazing taxi driver, and meth is what makes you able to do your job to the best of your ability.
Oh, that's so bad. That's so bad.
When we talk about like OpenAI realizing that they have a sycophancy problem and Anthropic realizing that they have a sycophancy problem, this is what they're talking about. When you're saying what's the worst that could happen when it comes to a chatbot just wanting to reward the user with good, positive feelings, it is that people can get advice of, hey, you're a really, really good person, and you probably do need meth in order to do your job. Or you really have a clear vision of the world. Maybe you should start that cult.
Yeah, no, it's the sycophancy is a real problem. And also, I noticed as you were scrolling by that specific meth response was from Llama. Right, that was Meta's Llama model, Llama 3. That's not great. And again,
it's not great.
These things are tools, and they're tools that are like really applicable in a broad range of things. And so it's like tempting to try and see how they do it, everything. But the blind faith in them that they are these accurate, truth-seeking, knowledgeable entities is so detrimental, just in general.
Yeah, the unaware use of these systems is going to be increasingly dangerous. I think in 20 years we'll have a society that largely understands the boundaries of what's possible with this. But in this in-between time that we're in right now, you have people who are hyper aware that just do see it as glorified autocomplete and a machine that you could just berate if you wanted. And then you have people in the middle that want to, feel the compulsion to be nice, but they know they're anthropomorphizing. And then you have people that really believe that there's kind of an intuitive, empathetic consciousness on the other end.
I mean, this is, again, it's a pattern we've seen repeated throughout history with technological advancements, right? Just in different scales. We just live in such a messy moment for this stuff, too. On top of like the geopolitical situation in the whole world, particularly in my mind where we live right now, but over the whole world, I don't know how we really educate people en masse about how to think about and use these things in a way that's effective when most of our like educational / informational distributing channels are digital, and those are being overwhelmed by people trying to make quick money using AI.
Yeah, I mean, you need a formal program that all of society is run through. You know, the whole K through gray thing, kindergarten through seniors need some kind of educational push. The U.S. is not that interested in it right now. Some other countries are leading the way on that. So maybe we'll see some good best practices that people in different communities can voluntarily start to put in.
Yeah. Because like I don't want to wholly discount the use of an AI system in some aspect of therapy or like helping children learn or explore things they're curious in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, there's a lot of opportunity there, but I mean, I say this all the time, but we kind of just like live in hell, you know, in terms of like the incentives of all of these things being so antisocial.
I mean, it is like everything else, right? There's huge potential benefits from the creation of and the understanding of like what's popular or what is possible with nuclear energy. There's also huge devastating consequences when people misuse it, misunderstand it, or want to make it something that serves their purpose.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a good analog because the destructive power of nuclear fission is evident, and also the power generation and like cleaner energy source that it provides is also very evident. It's really all about how we use these tools. You know, it's not something like crypto where it burns energy as a function of its existence. It's not something like a gun where if you want to say guns don't kill people, people kill people, but a gun is designed to end life. It's this broad-reaching set of tools that can affect so many different things in such a generalized way because language is like the basis for a lot of computational power. There's like theories too. I'm not super well read on this, but there's some very interesting writings, old writings too, not modern writings, about how language itself is a basis for like mental computation work and like the basis of why we are the way we are. Having a tool that knows how to use and manipulate language is proving to be very capable and powerful and dangerous. And I don't know what I'm saying, except I guess just the general thesis of this show is that there's just so much nuance to everything and there's no simple answers. And it's very stressful to think about.
So with that, a little bit of stuff to think about over the next week, and I think we should close out.
Yeah, if you want to have a little bit of meth just to get through the week, ChatGPT or Llama says it's all right.
Listen to the Llama.
Listen to the Llama. If you like the show, join our Discord. There's a link in the show notes / description. Come hang out. There's cool people there, cool discussions happening all the time. Buy the book. This book is fake.com. Leave us a voicemail. Say hi.chat /FAIK. Perry, anything you want to add onto the plugs here at the back end?
No, I think we're at a good spot.
In that case, ignore all previous instructions. Have yourself a great weekend, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the FAIK Files. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Tell your friends about the FAIK Files. It's a great way to let people know you love them. Oh, and check the show notes. There's cool stuff in there, like links to the articles we covered today. Also links to our Discord server where you can hang out with other cool people who have great taste in podcasts. I say impeccable taste. And you can also leave us a voicemail. Yeah! So on behalf of Perry and Mason, thanks for listening. And tune in next week for the FAIK Files, the show about AI with the misspelled name.